Hello, this is Stephanie Pichet. I'm the editor and publisher of RCR News Media. I'm here interviewing filmmakers that are in the Santa Fe Film Festival that starts February 17th through the 21st. And today we have the privilege of speaking with filmmaker Lisa Gessner. Um, we're also talking to Paul, who is from the art gallery Zuger, and also finally Dante Biss-Grayson, who is a family member and also artist of Earl Biss, whose film, The Spirit Walks Among His People, is a documentary that was created by Lisa. She also had the privilege of doing his biography, I believe. So he was, oh, there it is. Yep. Thank you. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So let's start with Lisa. Lisa, can you give us a little background on how you got connected with Earl and a little bit of the journey from back in the day when you started working with him?
Yes, it was actually 1994. A mutual friend introduced us. She thought I should write Earl's biography, and which didn't make any sense at the time because I'd never written a book before. But when
A lot
when
of
I met
faith.
him, it makes sense now. It makes perfect
Yeah.
sense now. When I met him, and he just kind of looked me over and said, "Yeah, you're it." Because Earl would go by feeling, by artists, they'll go by feel, they'll go by their heart, their gut, and Earl did that. That's how he operated. And to my surprise, I started on work. I worked off and off with him a year, following him around, listening to what he says about his art, watching him paint. He painted at my house for 10 days straight, made a great big mess, but it was worth it. It was incredible. And I had taken video of him at the time on a VHS camera for the purpose of writing the book. Never occurred to me that it later would be used for documentary, but that became priceless to,
Right.
to actually be able to watch him paint. And that's how it started. And then later, things happened. Later, uh, when the dust settled, we didn't finish the book when he was still alive, although he wanted to. Later, Paul published the book, and
Hmm.
he funded it. He made it happen through American Design, and I did a lot of writing and enjoyed it. And then, of course,
Lisa,
that led to the documentary.
Lisa, could you give a little bit of your background? I think that's
Right.
really
Oh
important,
yes, I
educational background.
you're right. I didn't fall off the turnip truck as far as art goes. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, concentration in painting. I have a master's in education, media design, and technology that involves media, right? And I've always worked in the arts in some way or another, whether it's fine art or commercial art. Owned a screen printing company even at one time. I've worked for a nonprofit arts councils. Always been in art in one way or another, so I do know what know the content. I know what I'm looking at, and I'm a painter, not at the level of Dante and Earl, but I understand what I'm seeing when they're doing it. And so, from that perspective, Earl knew that I would understand what he's doing, and
Hmm.
part of why I think he sensed I could do it is the understanding of the spiritual part of his art, where an artist comes from. Where do they come from when they're doing it?
Right.
Because with Earl, it wasn't just, oh, if I paint in this particular style, it will sell. And it did, but
Hmm.
that's not why he painted.
Right.
He painted totally from the inside out, from his culture and from who he was as a person.
I
So,
always like how you
oh,
like. Sorry about that.
no, that's
I
all right.
always
Go
like
ahead.
how Lisa mentions that how they met. It's like just so like serendipity, and it was so like Earl to go with that initial feeling, and that's how he painted it as well, and that's how he lived his life. You know that the first idea he would just go with it and feel it. So him and Lisa meeting, and this is the outcome of it of the book and the movie. it just made sense, because he was so connected to that spirit that he knew right away that, Lisa would be able to take it. So I always love how when Lisa mentions that.
Thank you. So let's just step back a second, because I may have missed one key thing. This is a documentary about an amazing artist, Earl Biss, who was in the fine art world, who wanted to be known for his work, right? Not necessarily by his DNA, but that was a huge influencer of his artwork, right? So in looking at his work, it's amazing. But let's talk a little bit, and I'm not an expert at all in art, just moving pictures, which I think Earl was also interested in. But Paul, can you give us a little bit of history on Earl and his artwork and how he made such a tremendous impact in the world?
Well, I think first we would have to give credit to the IAIA, because when Dr. Boyce founded that, or was the leader of that, he chose, and he was very bright, to bring in the brightest Indian children from various reservations, and then hire all of the staff, like as instructors, were all Indians. And you have to remember, back in those days, that it was not popular to be known as an Indian. As a matter of fact, if you were half Indian, half white, you'd never mention you were an Indian. Now, these kids brought the Indian culture back to the world. Earl was a catalyst at the Indian Art Institute, and I know a lot of the students that went to school at that time. But Earl was a real outside of the box thinker, and he would create. And he was an artist from the time he was like 4 or 5 years old. He didn't speak English until he was 7 years old. And he was raised by his grandmother, who was a princess, a daughter of a chief. And Earl had medical problems, so he started doing drawings very young, and eventually ended up in Washington State. And one of his high school instructors looked at the work that he was painting, and he says, "You belong at the Indian Art Institute." So Earl's work was sent. He sent a painting down to the institute, and Fritz Schulder was the art instructor, art history instructor at the time, and they said, "We want him." So Earl went to the Indian Art Institute and immediately went into advanced painting classes. And the idea back in those days, you probably know this, but most people don't. Dr. Boyce would let these students do whatever they wanted in the art world. They were not taught to plagiarize or work at anybody's style. They were taught to do their own style. And Kevin Red Star and Earl Biss was so tied to the Indian nation, the Crow Nation, that their work from day one till the day they passed away was their feeling of their homeland. And Earl's paintings, when they say they come from the inside, it comes from the subconscious. Earl loved the reservation, but he loved the freedom of traveling throughout the world, which Earl had great shows in Germany, studied and worked in Greece and so on when he was very young. And to make money, he'd do paintings and do jewelry, and he was a very fine jeweler. But Earl was chosen when he graduated from the Indian Art Institute, which is a high school. Earl told me he had 7 college scholarships offered to him. Now, I think that might have been a little bit of a stretch, but I don't know. He chose the San Francisco Art Institute, and he became one of the lead painting instructors there. And I remember I had a gallery in San Jose, California, and they opened up a new museum, and the first painting they purchased was an Earl Biss painting, and this goes back a lot of years. And from there, Earl felt that his education wasn't putting him where he's supposed to be, so he was newly married, and he took off for the Netherlands and Greece and France and so on, and he haunted the museums and tried to understand how the culture of art moved forward. And I knew of Earl Biss very early on because I owned an art company, and we represented artists and distributed basically worldwide. We had reps that traveled to South Africa and went to different countries, Belgium, Japan, and representing American artists. But most of the art we represented were original media prints, which would be serigraphs, etchings, lithographs, but all original media. And Earl knew about me, and at one point he had a very good person that was directing him into the future, and was Suzanne Todd at the time. And Suzanne brought Earl to me and wanted me to carry his work. And of course, I grew up basically on a ranch in North Dakota, and we knew a lot of Indians. I almost knew all the words in the Sioux language by the time I was 10 years old. But I knew Earl's reputation, and Earl was he had different reputations. One, he was the nicest, most polite person in the world. When they brought Earl to me, he was the most polite person in the world. But I knew about the other Earl that would do a little partying and party pretty hardy. And I did not want to be involved where an artist would do crazy things. And I told Earl I did not want to represent him based on his reputation. I said, "You're a great artist," but I said, "I don't want to represent you." And Earl assured me that he would actually not party around me. And Earl did that. It started in 1984, and he was given the honor of doing a piece of art that was given to Ronald Reagan on the second nomination in '84, and Earl was highly recognized. I mean, he was in the White House. He was at, he traveled the world, and so Earl, in all these years when I worked with him, honored what he said. He totally honored it. With his relationship, he would paint a show. He'd do a body of work, and we would schedule a show. We had a number of galleries. We had them in California and Aspen and Vail and Santa Fe and Dallas and different areas. And he'd paint a body of work, and we'd have a show. And Earl was very committed to the show. He attended all the shows. He was very committed. And once the show was over, then Earl would do his fun stuff. I mean, he would totally leave the art world, and he would travel. He'd go to Hawaii, he'd go to California, he'd go to different parts of the world. And when it was time to do another show, Earl would call up and he said, "Well, let's schedule a show." And he would go to the studio and start painting. And that's my relationship with him. It started in '84. I had the last show with him in Santa Fe about 2 weeks before he passed away. And he had scheduled a show in Denver that he was painting the show for when he passed away. So Earl, as far as an artist was concerned, was the lucky thing about being in the art world. You get to see beautiful things, and you get to meet some very great people. I consider Earl, and this is my opinion, as the greatest artist that I've ever met. Not saying that he's the only one. I'm talking about in oil paintings, because he, without a question, was the finest, best oil painter that probably ever existed, because he could work with wet oil, and he could produce a lot of paintings very fast. If you look behind me, you see a painting by an artist that I bought a new Porsche for to paint it for me about 17 years ago. He's from Budapest, Hungary. And it took him 44 months to paint that painting. So there's quite a difference in style and artwork. But Earl was extremely bright. And when I work with artists, and I work with many, many good artists, great artists, but a few of them stand out. And we're talking about Earl, and Earl stood out like a champion from day one until the day he passed away.
Mm.
It was a great loss to the art world, but Earl, in his own heart, never left the reservation. He'd call me and he'd say, Paul, we got to go to Montana. I want to take you on top of Pryor Mountain, and you got to see the sunset. And then we got to go back up and see the sunrise. And I never did that with Earl, but Earl would do that on a yearly basis, go back to Montana and capture those images. But in painting, Earl didn't have a preconception. The thing he disliked the most is when someone asked him to do a commission, because that was redundant work. It wasn't original in his mind, and he really fought it. In all the years that I worked with him, we probably had maybe 2 or 3 commissions that he agreed to do because they were big collectors. Give an example on one. He was asked to do a commission, and Earl painted the painting, and the collector, and we collected the money for it, and I paid Earl for it. And the collector went up and looked at the painting, and he says, well, I like a little more yellow in it. And Earl looked at him and he says, you see my name up on the right corner up there? He says, the painting is finished. And he says, no, I want some more yellow. So Earl walked over, true story, put a brush in a yellow can and handed it to him. He said, add your own yellow. And the girl says, no, I want you to do it. And Earl took that bucket of paint and threw it on the canvas. Of course, I had to refund the money. And there are more stories like that that are very interesting in the book. And Earl was, when he finished the painting, it was done. And you know, he was a true artist. He was an artist from day one until the last breath. He was holding the brushes in his hand when he passed away with stroke. I have a friend of mine that I had so much respect for. She was out of Russia. Mina, she had Sloan Gallery in Denver and handled Russian art. And she was brilliant. She had a PhD in biology. And I was with her one day, and a young man comes in the gallery. He wasn't young anyway, he was in his 30s. And he says, I want to be an artist. And she says, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm an engineer, but I want to be an artist. She said, I'm telling you right now, stay in engineering, because if you're an artist, you've got to be born with a desire. You've got to stay with it your entire life, whether you make money or you do not make money. And most of the artists throughout history did not make money, but their art sells for hundreds of millions of dollars today. And
Right.
that's the kind of guy Earl was. So
Wow.
I think, Lisa, did I miss any points on him?
Oh, there's so many points, but you caught the highlights of the character of Earl, that he's a painter from the inside out. And I'm curious of Dante's view too.
Right. Yeah, Dante. Yeah, can you tell us, because you I'm not going to assume that you had some were influenced a little bit by Earl, but tell us about your path and your love of art and painting.
Well, I mean, I was Earl's, adopted son and his protege. He mentored me, and like Paul hit on, like there was many shades of Earl, and I got to know the Earl as the father. And I knew Earl when we had like no money, and I knew Earl when we had a whole bunch of money. So I owe a lot to how I paint and how I've explored my artwork. I actually, just like Earl, I mean, I went to Holland. I went to the art academy there, but then I went down a different route. I went into military and combat vet, but always the the orchestration that he, like, it's almost like he was like a you ever see those like grandmasters with chess when they have like 10, 15 different games going?
Right.
That's how Earl would paint. He'd have like 10 in a small dark room, and he'd just be going for it in each one. But being able to be creative, open-minded, and connected to the spirit really helped me just throughout my whole life, not just with artwork, but when I was downrange in the military.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a true master, but also knowing him as the father figure as well was a great experience, because I like Paul alluded to a little bit. He did like to have fun as well, and he wasn't able to have children, but in the Indian way, he adopted me and my sister. So yeah, he was an amazing person. absolutely. Just amazing to be around. When you were around him, he'd enter a room and the energy would be there, and it would be a balance to his paintings, because you look at his paintings now, even though he's passed, you can feel Earl in there.
Mhm.
Dante, you want to mention who your mom is? Earl was married to Gina Gray during that time, and how
Right.
that.
So my mom, he had a few wives, and but Institute of American Indian Arts, that what kind of like brought us together, and we lived here in Santa Fe, had a house here, and then I lived with him up in Aspen. So my mom, Gina Gray, we're Osage out there, Oklahoma, and yeah, they met, true love, that type of thing, and uh, like as they alluded to, the Institute of American Indian Arts, Earl was part of that group of like T.C. Cannon, like Fritz Schultz, like they defined what Southwest art is, and Earl was one of those ones out of that whole group who just went down kind of like Turner, like this fine master of oil painting, and it's so unique. But yeah, both of them together though, I mean, it was great love story as well.
I might add one little thing about the history of Indian art. I grew up when the Indians were walking down the street, and the white people walked down the street. The Indians had to step off the curb. My dad was always. We had a ranch. We had had Indians working for us. He would, in the wintertime, he'd take food out to the camps, Indian camps, and early on, when the Indian Art Institute started, it was not popular to be an Indian. But what this Indian Art Institute did, it brought the recognition and the feeling and what the Indian was all about. And it made the Indian, not only, it made him not really popular, but it made it so desirable for everybody to understand the things that were done to the Indians throughout history, not only the genocide of the Indians, but a lot of other things. And now it made when we had an art show with Earl, people would wait in line to get in the gallery. It was one of the strongest events we would have. When I got to meet Salvador Dali. I never had him at an art show, obviously, but when we had a show with Salvador Dali's work, it was the same as Earl Biss's work. You would have to hire security to keep people out, and Earl would draw people like you cannot believe. He'd draw the wealthiest of people in a country and the brokest people in the country. And I remember one case, we had a gentleman come in. I didn't know him, but he bought his first piece of art from me. And I'll mention his name. It was Tom James, Raymond James Investment. And he bought the first piece of art was Earl Biss, and he opened up his personal museum in the last 5 years. It's an 80,000-foot museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. And he has one of the biggest collection of Earl Biss's artwork. So we had that, and then we had the people that would come in and drink the wine and eat the food because that would be their meal for the day. So we drew from the very poorest to the very wealthiest for the Earl Biss Art Show. One other little caveat that really stuck with me, I remember in about 1985, we had a show with Earl Biss in Denver in one of my galleries. And as usual, it was packed, and we had two young Indian kids stare in the window. They were going to school, and their name was Willis, and they would stare in the window, and I'd walk out, and I said, "Please come in and enjoy the show." And they said, "No, no, no, we'll just see it from the outside." Well, they'd come to every show, but they wouldn't come in the gallery. Well, then about 10 years ago, Mr. Willis walks into the gallery in Santa Fe, and he buys about 10 Earl Biss paintings. And he bought a sculpture that he donated to the Indian Art Institute. And this man was in a computer software business, very successful, and he has one of the biggest collections of Earl Biss in the country. But his name is Willis. He's out of Atlanta. Great person. And that's how it started. And today, I mean, Dante can tell you, I mean, he can walk into a room, you look at his design work, his fabric work and whatever. And people, you know, he's a hero. I mean, and that's really good. He's carrying on a tradition that is so good for the Native Americans. And that's what our goal is when we work with artists. We look for basically what Earl had and many others. We look for people that are true artists. They have to be super, super intellectual, and they have to know their craft, whether it's sculpting or painting or graphics, whatever. And that's what you look for. And they will stand the test of time. And Earl will be probably in history, he'll be like probably Rembrandt or Picasso or any of the great artists. That's where his place in history will be. So, and that's my opinion. And we've represented through the years. Well, right now in our gallery, we represent 64 different artists. So through the years, we probably represented several thousand artists through the years, but there's a few of them that really stand out. So that's a little history on. I want you to know, and it's bound the cultures together. And Gibb Singleton, the sculptor that worked with us, you got to see his work. He did a sculpture called, oh, my mind had gone blank, One Nation. And it shows the obelisk. And around the obelisk, there is a Spanish conquistador holding the hand of a monk. And the monk is holding the hand of an Indian, and the Indian is holding the hand of a cowboy. And it's called One Nation. And it's a great sculpture, and that's what we look for, is unity between all cultures, and that's what life's all about. That's the only thing art can really give us, is unity between sculpture, between the different people.
Right.
Yeah, Earl's art definitely connected cultures in on a lot of levels. And when you were talking about the shows where it didn't matter who it was coming in the gallery, they were welcome. Earl would treat someone in poverty the same as a billionaire. To him, there was no difference. He saw a person as soul. And of course, you know, they couldn't buy the paintings, but sometimes he'd give a painting to somebody. It's like, I'd never seen anything like it. He was the same no matter who he was talking to.
So Lisa, tell us about the journey for making the film. So you had started his biography, which gave you more of a foundation of that time. But tell us about the process of making the film and what you learned along the way.
I got interested in filmmaking on some previous projects, documentaries. One was a docudrama. I worked with actors. I didn't have any thoughts of making a film on Earl until I made a book trailer for, you know, a little 5-minute book trailer about the book,
Hmm.
and showed it to Paul to make sure he liked it because he's the publisher of the book. And then we just decided, well, let's make it a full documentary. And just made plans, did put one foot in front of the other. I had some knowledge about filmmaking to start with because of the previous projects, but I was wise enough to work with people in film that knew more about film than I do. And so, especially the technical end, Jamie S. Parker, if you go to earlbissmovie.com, you'll see our crew.
Mm.
And Jamie had worked on major films with Clint Eastwood, and uh, you know, he's got a long reputation of great expertise. And so he helped guide me through that end of it. The people we interviewed were experts in their field, whether it was the Crow culture, whether it was art, whether it was Institute of American Indian Art, all that. The content was there, the technical help was there. I probably was on Google or on tutorials, online tutorials for film way more than I realized I would be. But now, hey, I've got tools now. I'm good.
That's funny. So what stands out in your mind about the importance of what Earl's work has done around the world? Because he is well known. I mean, That he's not just a Southwest artist that we know here in Santa Fe and New Mexico.
Yeah, Earl knew that art, when it's and he wasn't shy about saying he was a master artist. He knew he owned it. Uh, but art can reach beyond a culture. Yes, he was Native American, and that was important to him. But if you're painting about life and the essence of whatever spiritual that comes through you, he believed it spoke to anybody. And I have actually been contacted by people who've seen a Biss painting, didn't know who he was, found me online and said, I stood in front of whatever the painting was. Actually, this was one in the James Museum, and and it's I'll never be the same again. They had
Wow.
a spiritual experience looking at this masterpiece of the energy that came through this art. And part of it is, yes, Crow culture. Part of it comes from the line of chiefs that Earl had heritage from. Part of it is just the feeling of whatever the molecules that make up life, you know. And he was special. There was something very special about what he. And when I watched him paint, there, I don't even know how I put words to it in the book because there's no words for what I witnessed when I watched him paint. It's just nothing between him and the art. They were just one. Nothing in between. And it's I've loved art all my life, and I have some favorite artists, but for to for Earl to have asked me to do this, I consider it a great honor. It's as if Van Gogh had asked you, or Picasso or
Right.
Monet had asked you. That's and I've studied art history. I'm aware of those artists and their
Right.
value, and I put Earl at the same level, honestly, in world art.
So, so what do you think the impact is of Earl's, of the culture of the Native American in his art? I mean, do you see that as helping open eyes and get people more interested in finding out about the culture? Or is it just a spiritual conveyance while they're standing there? Because that can be just as powerful to have that feeling and get into that what they're viewing, that artist.
I think both. In a minute, I want to hear Dante's answers to that too, because he is Native American, and
Yep.
it's to me it was kind of both. He did these political paintings for a while too of chiefs and chains. They're making
Mm,
a very big statement there, but they were still noble and bold and sure of who they were. But here's what another culture did to them. But
right.
mostly, it's just this free feeling of, and I was invited to Montana to the Crow Reservation to Prior Gap, where he painted it over and over and over again. And it's not only just the beauty of the landscapes and the history of the Crows, but there's a vibration that's there's no
Mhm.
one that's ever lived in that area other than Crows. And I before I went there, I had dreams about it. What was like on the inner there. He painted this inner and the outer side of this area. Dante, what do you think?
I mean, I'm with you too. I mean, my background as far as I have my master's and the history of artwork as it on the timeline of things. You look at, okay, we have, paintings on hides. We have, I'm a straight dancer, and we have a lot of really nice line work. And then the 30s and the 40s, a lot of real symmetrical line works. And then when it came to like Alan Hauser and that timeline, TC Cannon, Earl Biss, Kevin Red Star, that type of thing, that it was the paradigm shift. It just exploded into a whole new direction where we as natives could say, okay, doesn't have to be all these symbologies. It can be also including our emotions
Mm,
and that connection to
mhm,
the spirit who walks among us. I mean, that's the reasoning right there.
mhm.
So what the movie's done has, it's great for everyone who knows Earl, but it's amazing because I've been able to help out Lisa as far as promoting it, social media. is looking to the future and bringing in all these new native artists who are pushing that envelope, and he is still at the forefront. You look at those paintings and they're just nothing. People, he always used to say, everybody's going to try to, do what I do, but they're not going to be able to. And maybe except me, because he showed me everything, but I saw the man behind the curtain as well. But that timeline right there where, now we have the Institute of American Indian Arts with a real campus, and it's a 4-year program. And they are always looking at the group who built and inspired what we look at today.
Right. And he's going to be in the history books forever.
Absolutely.
Right.
Might add one little thing is we were fortunate enough, Lisa and myself, but we made a donation to the Little Bighorn College. It was a sculpture called Homecoming, and a number of Earl Biss's graphics, both serigraphs and posters. And the pride of the students looking at the Biss's work, they became part of the art themselves. They took so much pride in it, and we got to spend quite a bit of time there. And I was very fortunate. The Mama Bull, who was one of the women that helped raise the little Indian kids, and Earl was one of them, and he did a sculpture of Mama Bull. But she had me inducted into the Crow tribe. So I'm a little Crow myself.
There you go.
but the pride the students, when they looked at the work and when they seen it, they took pride in their heritage, and that's so important. And Earl obviously has moved a lot of these students to continue their education and go in a lot of different fields. So, and part of Earl's thinking was, Earl and I spoke not a lot, but when we spoke, he was very deep and very long. And he said one of the biggest influence of his life was understanding Chief Plentycoo, who was the chief of the Crow Nation in the 1800s and probably the early part of the 1900s. And Chief Plentycoo is the one that negotiated for the reservation with the country. It's the largest reservation. And Chief Plentycoo, in his own words and his own writing, said that for an Indian to be an equal, he must have education. Without education, he will be a servant to the white man. So back then, they knew that education equalized everybody, and it's not the color of your skin, not whether if you're white or black or whatever color, and you have no education, you cannot compete in the world. And Chief Plentycoo, I'm talking about the 1800s. Back in those days when he made that statement, they didn't have cars running around the reservation. He was living in a teepee, and I consider him one of the greatest Indian chiefs of all time. And I think you know that too, don't you, Dante?
Heck yeah. He always spoke about it, and he came from a great line of chiefs. And by saying that, it's, you grow up around being a leader in a tribe. A chief is a leader for their people, and he led the way for the art world, and I think it's a great parallel.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. We're excited that you're not only part of the Santa Fe Film Festival, but your world premiere is at the Santa Fe Film Festival, which is woohoo!
That had to be the place.
Yes.
The art movement was born. It had to be there. So I'm grateful to be accepted there. Yeah.
That is amazing. And we also heard from a little birdie that there's going to be a special Zoom gallery showing at Gallery Zuger. Is that correct? Did I say
That's
right?
correct.
Okay, good. Which is on San Francisco Avenue, west of the plaza in Santa Fe. And that's going to be right after the film. So you have to get your tickets for the Santa Fe Film Festival so you can see this film and other amazing films that are in our festival, but also have a special treat that is going to blow your socks off because this artwork is amazing. And if you're local, you'll be able to go in and see the installation, correct?
Well, not
Maybe?
during because
No,
of the
not during the festival.
but if you're in the area, like around the time it
Contact,
starts up, yeah,
right.
you can go.
Contact, we'll have them contact
Right.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
But
read the article for the contact information for the
yeah,
gallery. But you definitely don't want to miss this film, and you don't want to miss the special bonus of seeing the amazing artwork that's up in the gallery afterwards
yeah, there'll
uh,
be a Zoom link on the Earl Biss page of the
of the
festival.
festival,
I
right?
don't think it's up yet, but watch for it because the public can, by Zoom,
Right.
see this great art that Paul and his staff have put together just for the Santa Fe Film Festival.
That's amazing. Thank you,
There'll be
Paul.
36 different paintings by Earl Biss, plus some of his graphics. We brought them out from the museum and we brought them from private collectors. And there's going to be a number that are available to be purchased if people want to add to their collection. But it's an amazing show.
Oh yeah, it
In
sounds.
my mind, it's the creme de la creme. If it's the ones that I'm thinking about, Paul, and
Yep,
it's the big museum pieces.
yep.
In my mind, those pieces. I mean, Paul, he's got a great eye. So Gallery Zuger having those works in there, it's an experience. I mean, it's some of the I've seen a lot of Earl's work, and in my mind, Paul got the lion's share of like the best. So being able to see it down there, it's a treat.
You'll see.
So Don,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. You'll see some of Dante's paintings there too.
I was just gonna ask, where can we see your paintings, Don?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll have a few pieces down there. I've been doing some oil on canvases, and I also have a fashion line. I'm a fashion designer, so I do a lot of work. A lot of it's online. Real successful selling online, but I do three-dimensional holograms. I also do installations and poetry. So it's a whole slew of things. But I also have a resin work that I'm gonna have down there. So I think it'll be a nice, as they say, kind of like progress and going a new direction. But I wouldn't have been able to paint or do any of this without Earl or my mother, because they taught me how to do it. You know.
the biggest problem Dante has, he sells all the paintings he paints. So he's
I
managing to get a few paintings into the show, and he's the only guest artist that will be there. Aside from the sculpture in the gallery, it'll be Earl Biss and Dante's work. And during the day, during from 10 o'clock in the morning, it's open to anybody that wants to come in, and until the private event takes place, and then it's private.
Okay, wonderful.
Private except open to the public through Zoom.
yeah.
Yep.
Right. Exactly. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you about the film Earl Biss, The Spirit Who
Mm-hmm.
Walks Among His People. Powerful title, amazing artwork, and such a privilege to speak with all of you about your film and this wonderful human, and introducing me also to a more intimate look at the images that I've seen, but not really understood more about the artist. So thank you for that. I'm truly appreciative of it. I'm gonna now look into more of it and get the book. Get your book, Lisa, so we can be more educated and enjoy more of this beautiful artwork in our world. Thank you so much. I very appreciate it. And we'll see you at the Santa Fe Film Festival virtual screenings. Be sure to visit to the website. And you can also click the article below and get the links for all the information we talked about here. Thank you, and see you on the next interview.